Yo, what's up? Let's go. All right, let's go, y'all. We got a good book to do tonight. We're gonna cover something pretty cool, and that is Graham Greene's The Quiet American. All right. So this 1955 novel is pretty revelatory in a number of different ways, and I'm gonna enjoy diving into this because it is it sort of defies classification in a number of different ways. I mean, I guess you could say in general it's a postmodern novel, but it's really, it's really cool because it sort of crosses genres. For one, it's an espionage novel, and it's kind of an adventure story. It looks and feels like a sort of cheap paperback. I mean, you kind of get the feeling like you're reading an Alistair MacLean novel or something. But it's actually a whole lot more, and it's on the list. It's on a bunch of short lists for one of the top 10 books of at least the post-war period, right? Postmodernism, 1945 to the present, generally speaking, right? But really now we're sort of postmodern. We're in the Great Reset era, right? So, but this is a cool book because it's a compelling read, and it's really great because it is predictive, or maybe prophetic is a better word, for the American interventionism, right? The American intervention in Vietnam. And I was just reading an article, sort of glossing over an article, glancing at an article before the stream started, about Beat Buttigieg, right? That dude, and how he wrote one of his grad school papers on the Quiet American by Graham Greene, and he sort of missed many of the lessons in the novel, and that speaks to really kind of why we've been doing a lot of the works that we've been doing, or the whole channel in general, because a lot of the great works of literature, in the canon, are often misspoken, misstated, misquoted, misremembered, or intentionally sort of skewed. So it's good to go back to the source material. And so yeah, we're gonna dive into this. Now there are two movie versions of this book. One was a sort of non-faithful adaptation that was early on. I forget who was in it, because I didn't really pay attention to that one. I've seen the remake, and it came out. It's interesting because it came out in 2001, of course, right at the Big Nine event. And I saw the movie the first time I saw it. It's got Michael Caine. And Brendan Fraser, who's making his big comeback. And it's a pretty good movie. It's a decent flick. I think it's Philip Noyce, and it's faithful to the book in a number of ways. It really gets the book a lot better than the first one does. But of course, it was nominated for a few awards. I think Michael Caine was nominated for one of his many Oscars for that movie, as if that matters. But it didn't do well because, of course, after we've talked about this before, how after the Big Nine, a lot of movies that were critical of America were sort of pulled or put into the background and were replaced with lighter material, right? So this is one of the casualties of that sort of culture war, I guess you could call it, or at least the sort of anti-propaganda of what happened immediately after that, and books falling apart. So I actually have I got my Pops' edition here, and I first read this book in, let's see, I read it May 20th, 1997. So I was 16 years old, and of course it's signed by my dad. Read it twice. My uncle read it, and in the book, actually, there's a clipping. My Pops put a clipping in here from when Graham Greene died. Graham Greene dies at 86, moralist, superb storyteller, from April 4th, 1991, and the book is one of these great Penguin editions. But of course they fall apart with continuous reading and a older edition. But anyway, whatever, we're not here to talk about that. What happens in the book is basically that we have this character Fowler, who is a British journalist. Of course, he's a journalist. But this is slightly different. This is different from the usual story about the journalist that we see as a cliche in films and movies, because right, Jerry. Because we don't have the journalist who's going to, expose the truth, right? They're the moral warrior, and they're going to expose the truth as if that happens. I mean, sometimes that happens. That's where we get a lot of our revelatory material, right? But rare. Instead, in this one, we get a guy who is a self-consciously non-partisan, purely objective journalist. He says. Of course, his actions sort of speak differently than that. But there's a reason for him doing that, and we'll get to that in the analysis. And he's living in Vietnam, and this is for when it's French Indochina. And this is, of course, at the tail end of... the novel's published after Dien Bien Phu, which was in 1954. It's published in 1955. So it's at the tail end. And what I find interesting about the book, my thesis for the book is essentially that this book captures the kind of inflection point, as I said in the description, between the British, the edge of the empire, right? It's at the edge of the empire. It's at the edge of the empire geographically, but of course, and we're talking about the sort of Anglo-American and continental power structure. I know that we're talking about the French here with French Indochina, but it represents the handover from the French colonial rule to the American colonial rule in the colonial intervention. And of course, the sort of tail end of the British colonial rule, because of course the voice of the speaker is a Brit. And as he says in the book, at one point, I came east to die. And that's emblematic of the swaying sort of systems of power that the characters sort of stand in for in the book. And so what happens is, the beginning is, he is hanging out with his girl who is, I don't know how to say it in Viet, right? But her name's Fong, and she, which translates to Phoenix, of course. And we're going to talk about the Phoenix program a little bit. Doug Valentine's Phoenix program and the actual Phoenix program, just as a tie-in. We won't be centering on that. And what happens is, he's with her. And he talks about this character named Pyle, okay? And Pyle is an American. He is the quiet American of the title, the titular quiet American. And, of course, he talks about him, he introduces him, and then we find out that he's dead because a detective comes and visits Fowler, and then we find out that the guy's dead. And then he is sort of under suspicion, but not really. And then we jump back in the narrative to when Fowler comes into the scene, and basically the story is about a love triangle between Fowler and Fong and Pyle, and of course that is because he's the older guy. He's an older character. He's like in his 50s. He's not as old as I think. Michael Caine thought that he was too old to play the character, but he plays him well in terms of like his. The general feeling of what this character is supposed to be. And Pyle is the younger American character. Of course, Pyle is completely idealistic and has learned all about geopolitics in the East from books, especially one particular book by the fictional York Harding. And he's supposed to be a East Coast Harvard guy. And we know right away, without having read the book, can you guess who Pyle really is? You guys in the audience will know this right away. He's an East Coast guy from Harvard. He goes there. He's working for the, Bureau of Economic Affairs. So, of course, we know that this guy is CIA. And that's the big, reveal in the book. And I think probably anybody reading this would understand that. But we find out that he's CIA and that he's actually there under a kind of a diplomatic cover, I guess. And all of a sudden, there are a series of bombings in Saigon, and it turns out that Pyle, who is interested in importing plastic parts, has been funding a third way revolution false flag operation through by making bicycle bombs. Okay, and so he sets off a series of bombings to destabilize the place, and then it ends up that he's sort of caught up and he gets assassinated. And then we have to deal with Fowler's sort of aftermath. And that's it. That's the book. So that's like what happens on the surface. But of course, the book is so much more because it's really about the fear, loathing, and ennui of this character, of this older character, and the juxtaposition between him and the younger guy, which is also supposed to be the older empire, right, or the older, the I don't know, the Third Republic or whatever, leading into the French, as the last vestiges of the colonial French Empire. Of course, they had Algeria and French Indochina, all in the 20th century. The British colonial empire shrinks. And then we have the American empire expands and sort of takes over from that. Now, I know that's a very basic analysis. Okay, I know that's like a sort of a gloss over of geopolitics and history, but just go with me here in terms of just a kind of a basic overview. But what it's supposed to say is that Pyle is naive and of course represents the Americans coming in. And the interesting thing is that Pyle thinks that the Americans, that we, right, in terms of the audience here for, to whom he's speaking, that we will, that we can go in, it's an American exceptionalism, okay? That we as the exceptional Americans can go in and screw the mistakes of the French. They don't know what they're doing. And we can sort of fund the war, but not get involved enough, but still reap the economic benefits. And the point of what Mulcahy's character, I'm just going to call him that instead of Fowler, probably. But what he basically, says is no, you don't understand. That's not the way that it's going to go, right? You're either all in or you're out. And you will have no understanding of this place because you just came in fresh. Whereas Fowler has lived there for years. So he has this lover, Fong, and he's still married, right? Which is, again, this always happens with Vietnam literature and with Vietnam movies. Of course, go back to our Apocalypse Now stream, right, where we discussed how, one of the first things that Willard says in Apocalypse Now is, I didn't say a word to my wife until I said yes to a divorce, right? So he finally, same thing with Michael Caine or Fowler in this, he gets his divorce papers, and but it doesn't matter. He's totally, to him, he's totally and completely fatalistic on the he's an existentialist, really, because he's a nihilist in the sense that he's aware of meaning, but he doesn't believe in it. But his whole life is on the verge of this precipice. And it's interesting that, his rule is basically that he doesn't want to get involved, but he is involved. He's involved with the local population. He's involved. He knows the detective. He knows all the expats there. He has a lover there. He frequents the houses of ill repute and Trudeau Street and the opium dens. He's basically a transplanted Viet, right? And this speaks to the kind of end of the tradition in one sense of the British colonial empire and sending the public school boys over to the far reaches of the empire to rule the empire. Of course, he's just a lowly journalist, but he's still involved in power structure. But he's not involved in government because he sort of recognizes the ruthlessness of all these various characters, and he tries to stay apart. But what happens is, of course, that he goes out at one point on a story, and he's just reporting on some stuff. But then he finds himself kind of alone, and he realizes it's nightfall, and he has to get through the night. And there are patrols. There are roving bands of patrols, and he ends up thinking I got to survive this. They're just these people. We don't know who they are. Are they going to be friend or foe? Are they going to see me and they're going to kill me? And he's got to survive, but he's old. And then what happens is he runs into Pyle in the middle of nowhere, and Pyle is "Oh yeah, I just got here. I hired some guy. He put me on a sampan and took me up the river, and now here I am." Right now, they're not in Kurtz's compound. They're not in Cambodia, right? But they are pretty far out of the civilization of Saigon, and it's very weird because obviously Pyle got there because he is connected and is looking for assets or whatever he's doing there, but they end up going up into a watchtower, and there are these two guys, two young soldiers up there who are pointing a Sten gun at them, and one of them has a pistol, and Fowler's basically like, these guys are going to kill us. Grab the gun, and no. Fowler says, don't grab the gun. Just be easy, and then they put their guns down. But Pyle, it's interesting because there's a contrast here. Pyle is the naive guy who's never seen war. He's never seen real action, but he's an idealist. But he gets up there, he immediately grabs the gun, and he's like, we got to kill these guys. And then when they get down from the tower, because they hear a radio calling out, they don't know who it's calling for, but it's probably calling for the VC, right? Remember in Apocalypse Now? And what's going to happen is they're going to get shot. Well, he breaks his leg or he gets injured, and Pyle, he's like, just leave me. Just leave me here. Don't you understand? Just leave me. And then Pyle, of course, rescues him. He's this youthful guy. He's totally inexperienced in this area, but he picks him up. He's like, no, I'm going to get you out of here. And he takes him. Now, of course, we have an inkling as you're reading the book for the first time, and then you find out later that, of course, he's got, he has his CIA training. The guy was, probably at the farm. Well, he rescues him and gets him out. And then later on, Fowler berates him for this and says, don't you understand? I came to the East to die. You don't understand these people. And Pyle's like, no, it doesn't matter if I understand these people or not. It doesn't matter. We're essentially, we're here to take control of the situation and to use these people, which is interesting because it sort of echoes Fowler's own heritage, right, from the beginning. So that's what the book is about, and we're going to get into form, content, meaning, the text, looking at the text. And thank you to everybody who's here, who's joining me on this. What is this? This is a weekday? Oh, this weekday night in the middle of the week. And let me give some shouts out real quick. Big shout out, of course, to our homeboy JD over there at Jay's Analysis, who we were just on the other night, and we had an awesome conversation. We did a deep dive into The Wizard of Oz and then Return to Oz. We talked about a bunch of books. We went into esoteric Hollywood. We used Jay's own research, and so that was awesome. So thank him, y'all. Thank him. I thank him very much for having me on there, and hopefully we can see him again. We can chat again, and that was really awesome. And of course, big shout out to Jay for making that 100,000 sub milestone. And I know everybody in the audience understands because we're all there, but especially if you're just coming in new or something, that's taken many years. Jay's been around, of course. I mean, just doing YouTube since like 2008, 2009. So the numbers obviously would be a lot bigger, but that's it took so long to get there, and that's a lot of really incredible hard work, and we've gotten so much out of his work. So we got to say shouts out to him and thank him. Also, big shout out to our homeboy Church of the Eternal Logos, David Patrick Harry Coteasy, our homeboy out there who just passed 15,000 subs. Big time, y'all. We got some big time friends. So that's awesome. Show your love to them, of course. And if you want to support me, you can donate at any of the links that my homeboys in there, Jeff and Jerry at Exposing Powerful Lies live streams, who was the first person to have me on his channel. So thank you so much to Jerry. Thank you to Jerry. Thank you to Church of the Eternal Logos. Thank you to beautiful Tristan at Primal Edge Health. Thank you to West Lexicon Media. Thank you to all of my friends out there who have supported us so much. And so, yes, if you want to support me, you can drop some fat chats there. You can also click the super chat link and donate there. And that would really help me out, y'all. This is going to be, before we get into the text here, this is going to be one of our last analyses before we go on our, I keep saying we because you're here, with me. We're in this thing. Before I go on my holiday and go on down south. But while I'm down there, I'm going to be covering, the plan is, hopefully, we're going to be covering A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, and which I just picked up today. Another copy of it today, and some Christmas movies because it'll be, it's the time to do that. So it'll be cool. Also, I look forward to on New Year's Eve having our big mega based, our friend stream over there on Exposing Powerful Lies live streams with Jerry, and hopefully we're going to have some guests and some friends. We're going to do some watch along. We're going to do some funny stuff, and we're just going to chill, and we're going to ride right into the new year. And hopefully next year will be amazing. I pray that it is. So that's what we'll be doing tonight. Oh, one more thing. I'll also be covering soon. I just picked up a copy of The Road. So that'll be our fourth Cormac McCarthy novel that we're going to do. And, of course, before that, we're going to be doing our sponsored streams on A Face in the Crowd. We'll be doing Your Arkansas Traveler, the short story. We'll be doing the novel version of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and the film. And if you want to drop a fat chat, you can do that. And you can sponsor a stream, give me some ideas for things to do. Drop me $100 to do a novel or $50 to do a movie or, whatever. But, you guys, we're doing pretty well here. And we're almost at 1,500 subs. I can't believe it. I'm so thankful to everybody watching and to all of my friends that have come along on this journey with us, everybody out there watching. And I really appreciate you, just to have anybody with me here, just, discussing literature and doing some deep dives is pretty amazing. So thank y'all so much. Really appreciate you. So let's get into the novel. Again, 1955. It's interesting that one of his epigraphs is he quotes Byron. He says, and we've done a Byron stream, of course. He says, this is the patent age of new inventions for killing bodies and for saving souls, all propagated with the best intentions. From Byron, right? Which is going to set the scene and set the stage for what this whole quagmire giggity is about. Okay, so chapter 1. It begins, of course. I'm going to read the first sentence. And then the first paragraph, he says, after dinner, I sat and waited for Pyle in my room over the Rue Catinat. He had said, I will be with you at least by 10. And when midnight struck, I couldn't stay quiet any longer and went down into the street. A lot of old women in black trousers squatted on the landing. It was February, and I suppose too hot for them in bed. One trishaw driver pedaled slowly by towards the riverfront, and I could see lamps burning where they had disembarked the new American planes. There was no sign of Pyle anywhere in the long street. Of course, I told myself he might have been detained for some reason at the American legation. But surely in that case, he would have telephoned in the restaurant. He was very meticulous about small courtesies. I turned to go indoors when I saw a girl waiting in the next doorway. I couldn't see her face, only the white silk trousers and the long flowered robe, and I knew her for all that. She had so often waited for me to come home at just this place an hour. Fong, I said, which means phoenix. But nothing nowadays is fabulous and nothing rises from its ashes. I knew before she had time to tell me that she was waiting for Pyle 2. He isn't here. So that's the opening of the book, and we get a lot, okay, because we get a lot from the opening of the book like we always do with great works of literature. But one thing that's different just about the way that the book reads is we're reading the book like it's a paperback espionage romance novel. It's a really easy read. But we also get some things that are indicative of what's going on in terms of the characters. We've been introduced to Pyle, and we've lost him within the space of 2 paragraphs, meaning that we're introduced to this guy Pyle. We don't know who he is yet, but we know that it's in the first person, and we know that the speaker knows him. But we also know that something has gone wrong, and we know from his statement at the end there, nothing rises from its ashes. Well, something is going to rise from the ashes here. And, of course, that's going to be the American experience in Vietnam, which is going to rise from the ashes of Dien Bien Phu. Now, I know that's simplistic because America was the Anglo-Americans were funding this to begin with. If you want to read a great book about Vietnam, you should read Street Without Joy. It's a great book about Dien Bien Phu. You can also read some of the best books to read about Vietnam, in my opinion, are the books about the French Foreign Legion, because they really get to the heart of at least the military experience there. without diving into the kind of revisionist editorializing that you get from some of the academic works. Let's see. Also, Webb. You can read Webb's book about Vietnam, and probably the best, in my opinion, the best book about Vietnam that I've ever read would be one where Vietnam takes place sort of just as one facet of the Golden Triangle, and that would be the huge monumental work. Look, you can't. I mean, if you're interested in this stuff, in the stuff that we're interested in here, you have to. There are a few books that you really should read, or at least that you should familiarize yourself with. And one of those is Alfred McCoy's The Politics of Heroin, which is one of the classic books. I mean, this is McCoy was a professor at University of Wisconsin and wrote he's still alive, I think, but he wrote the book on the Golden Triangle and Kun Sa and Air America. And this is this is an amazing book. I read this in 2011. And I wrote, just as a footnote, this is the best book I've ever read on drug history, narco-terrorism, counter-espionage, subversive war, covert war, narco-economics, narco-capitalism, and this whole phenomena. Covers all aspects of the history of this time, including, ancient opium, history of opium as a colonial commodity throughout ancient and modern and postmodern contemporary history, the roots of smuggling, the roots of policy. It goes into the entire thing that funded this war. Another book, of course, would be, and that's right behind me, would be right back there, is Doug Valentine's The Phoenix Program. Right. And it's interesting. It's so interesting that the love of this guy is named Phoenix. Right. So let's go. Let's see here. What happens right after that would be, we see on pages 16 and 17, we see this character, Fowler, and then he goes home with Fong, and he's a well-to-do guy. You know, he has a job. He's an English expat, and he's connected with all these people. But he also, of course, is embedded enough in the culture to be prepared opium pipes from his madam every night. And he says, let's see, on pages 16 and 17, opium makes you quick-witted, perhaps only because it calms the nerves and stills the emotions. Nothing, not even death, seems so important. Which speaks to the decadent nature, right, of what this guy's doing here, and that he has to anesthetize himself in order to he anesthetizes and cauterizes his emotions against the outward events, right? He's also, it's weird because it also maybe works the reverse way. Maybe he's dead inside, and this allows him to feel something and be connected to the people in this sort of dark corner. Let's see. So on pages 30 and 31, we find out that Pyle is basically working for an NGO, and that his father is an academic. He's in the academic establishment. He's I think he's a geology professor. I can't remember. I have to get back to that in a second. But he's part of this sort of mockingbird establishment. And I wrote LOL folks at home, because there's a weird Norm Macdonald joke in here. He didn't write it as such, but he says the folks at home. And every time I hear the folks at home, I can't help but think of Norm. Why don't you tell the folks at home what the American economic attaché is? Okay, so it says, here's the American economic attaché. I'd be better off. I want to seal me up too. Vigo said wearily. Vigo is one of the other characters, a Viet character. I wish you luck. He'll have a terrible lot to say to me. The economic attaché was standing by his Packard when I came out, trying to explain something to his driver. He was a stout, middle-aged man with an exaggerated bottom and a face that looked as if it had never needed a razor. He called out, "Fowler, can you explain to this darn driver?" I explained. So this is, by the way, the term "ugly American" came about as a result of a play on this book, a play on words in terms of this book, right, which is The Quiet American, because it's supposed to be. It's also supposed to be ironic, right? Yeah, DJ says Adam Egret. Lose the douchebag. He says, I came out trying to explain. He says, but that's just what I told him, but he always pretends not to understand French. It may be a matter of accent. I was 3 years in Paris. My accent's good enough for one of these darn Vietnamese. The voice of democracy, Fowler says. What's that? I expect it's a book by York Harding. I don't get you. York Harding is a fictional character who writes this book about the ways of democracy and how it's supposed to be delineated throughout the world. And he comes up with this political theory called the Third Way, which is, there's a think tank called the Third Way. The Third Way is supposed to be, this is actual political theory, that the Third Way, and one that is put into practice. The Third Way is essentially the synthesis between the dialectic, right? The right and the left. And that is essentially what comes to pass in terms of, we have the flip-flopping of the political parties. One is pro-war, another is so-called pacifist, and then they're just pro-war in different ways, right? One is, overt military invasion. Another one is psyops and sort of proxy warfare, that's kind of a basic statement. But the way Pyle puts this into practice in the book is by funding the sort of black ops and thinking that he can get away with it with him not doing, with not being tied. It's a kind of what's Mark Lane's book? It's a kind of plausible deniability, I guess, for the power structure. But as Fowler is going to point out, this is never possible in a war in a foreign land where you have surreptitious warfare and the entire population has been mobilized. He says American sentimentalism will confuse the official channels. So at this point, it's supposed to be that the Americans are the unsentimental types, right? Which is kind of a flip-flop of what comes to pass in terms of literature and the way that the world thinks of Americans. On pages 36 and 37, we have The Highway to Hell. So it says, let me find this. My note says Stephen Crane. Where's the thing about Stephen Crane, right? The Red Badge of Courage. He alludes to. Oh, do you think I'd really go near their stinking highway? Stephen Crane could describe a war without seeing one. Why shouldn't I? It's only a damn colonial war anyway. Get me another drink. And then let's go and find a girl. You've got a piece of tail. I want a piece of tail too, I said to Pyle. Do you think there's anything in the rumor about Fat Diem? I don't know. Is it important? I'd like to go and have a look, he said, if it's important. Important to the economic mission. Oh, well, you can't draw hard lines. Medicine's a kind of weapon, isn't it? These Catholics, they'd be pretty strong against the communists, wouldn't they? So he's probing. Do you get what he's doing here? He's probing Fowler for questions about some of the characters. Diem was the Catholic CIA puppet, right, who then was later assassinated. That was pre-JFK. And Alan Dulles talks about it in the book, The Devil's Chessboard. And let's see, they get to the highway and there is a headless man kneeling and praying in a ditch, which I thought was interesting in terms of, like, it's almost hereditary Paimon imagery. But what it's essentially saying is that, like, that speaks to Fowler's worldview, which is the fatalism of, and his thoughts about the pointlessness of religion. He just sees war and death. Of course, he's part of this, right? And he's wrong. but he sees people. He sees something different than I think Pyle sees. If Pyle is idealistic in this moment, right? Or what Pyle sees is essentially that people are praying at the moment of death, whereas Fowler probably sees people praying for death. Of course, he continues to live there, and it says, "Oh well, you can't draw hard lines. Medicine's a kind of weapon, isn't it? These Catholics, they trade with the communists. The bishop gets his cows and the bamboo for his building from the communists. I wouldn't say they were exactly York Harding's third force." I teased him because Fowler is always giving him shit about the fact that he learned everything from a book, which is ironic because Fowler himself is a writer writing a book. It's in the first person. "Break it up," Granger was shouting. "Can't waste the whole night here. I'm off to the house of 500 girls." He, let's see. Says the economic attaché gave a loud communal laugh. He looked like a face on television. He said, "You young people can do what you want, but I'm too old for games. I'll take him home with me." Did you say he was French? He spoke French. After he was driven away, Pyle took a trishaw with Granger and Fong, and I followed along the road to Cholon. Granger had made an attempt to get into the trishaw with Fong, but Pyle diverted him. As they pedaled us down the long suburban road to the Chinese town, a line of French armored cars went by, each with its jutting gun and silent officer motionless like a figurehead under the stars and the black, smooth, concave sky. Trouble again probably with a private army, the Ben Zuyen, who ran the Grand Monde and the gambling halls of Cholon, which that's interesting because it speaks to, that reminds me of something Alfred McCoy talks about in The Politics of Heroin, which we see so much. I mean, this basically what happened was when Chiang Kai-shek, right, and the Nationalist Army were mobilizing, they enlisted the services of people like this guy Greene Du, who was a notorious Shanghai gangster who spoke Mandarin, spoke French, but he basically funded his operation on the heroin trade, running through Shanghai. And then, of course, he was co-opted by Chiang Kai-shek. You see that in the movie American Gangster when they go off to, when he goes into Vietnam and then he goes into the mountains and meets with Kun Sa. The guy in that movie is supposed to be Kun Sa. And you see it, of course, in World War II with the Americans enlisting the services of various, mafiosi to help in the invasion of Sicily. Let's see. But it's also interesting that he mentions the figurehead under the black concave sky because he's continuously, this is what these guys always do. They continuously use metaphysical language in order to describe things in their world, even though their supposed worldview is one of, non-religion and this fatalistic universe where things are just a series of domino events, which, of course, the domino events, the domino theory mirrors the events as to why Pyle is supposedly there. But they're never able to get past their own sense of self-loathing. I mean, you like Fowler because he's kind of a, he's an expat. He's kind of a bon vivant, and he tries to stay out of the war, and he's just covering it. But it's also like, okay, at some point, you have to realize that you have to take responsibility for your own actions. You left your wife back in England. You're not giving her the divorce. You never see her. You have no intention of going back to see her. And your life is just a series of trying to survive through your own, self-loathing. The loathing that he projects on the world seems to be more just, it's a projection. It's a projection of how he feels about himself, and because he's not able to come to terms with the fact that he himself he thinks that he's in this meaningless universe, but he never considers that maybe he's just one part of a universe that has meaning, and that he needs to, I mean, even when Pyle saves his life, right? I mean, that is the action that really shows you this character and shows you it's emblematic of the whole sort of system, which is that, like, he gets his life saved. His life is dear. It's at least dear to Pyle. I'm not saying Pyle is a good guy. Pyle is actually the villain in this, because he has this veneer, this sheen of, the idealistic American, but he's the one funding the whole thing and then doing these bombs and doing these fake flag operations that are killing innocent people, and yet he thinks that this is necessary because of American intervention and so forth, because he's trying to draw them into the war and to all this stuff. But Pyle at least saves his life, and he can't understand why Fowler is like, tells him, no, I came here to die, right? Well, if he came here to die, then what's he doing, right? He's just like living on the edge of this sort of nihilistic, he's living in the psychosphere, right? On page 44, B and E, okay, B through E, I'm going to read this section because this gets to what I'm talking about here. He says, I wished I had never heard the rumor about Fat Diem, or that the rumor had dealt with any other town than the one place in the north where my friendship with a French naval officer would allow me to slip in uncensored, uncontrolled. A newspaper scoop? Not in those days when all the world wanted to read about was Korea. A chance of death? Why should I want to die when Fong slept beside me every night? But I knew the answer to that question. From childhood, I had never believed in permanence, and yet I longed for it. Always I was afraid of losing happiness. This month, next year, Fong would leave me. If not next year, in 3 years. Death was the only absolute value in my world. Lose life, and one would lose nothing again forever. I envied those who could believe in a God, and I distrusted them. I felt that they were keeping their courage up with a fable of the changeless and the permanent. Death was far more certain than God, and with death, there would be no longer the daily possibility of love dying. The nightmare of a future of boredom and the indifference would lift. I would never have been a pacifist. To kill a man was surely to grant him an immeasurable benefit. Oh, yes, people always everywhere loved their enemies. It was their friends they preserved for pain and vacuity. Pretty dark there because it just shows how empty and lonely this guy is, right? Because it's the same thing. It's like, death is the only absolute, and he wants absolute freedom because he's afraid of abandonment, but he also envies those, he envies those who can take life because it feels like he would have a power over a life, and he feels like he has no power over his own life. Well, take charge, dude. Right? Take some control. Get yourself together. Right? Stiff up a lip. And it's not like he's whining, but it's worse than whining. Right? Jeff says, BLA hat, backwards hat, every stream. Shouts out to y'all for staying here. Let's see. He says, there's a Hamlet reference on page 55A. He says, let's see. The wind was up again, prowling for an entry. The canvas curtain sagged. The canvas curtain sagged, right? I was reminded of Polonius stabbed behind the arras, and the candle wavered. That happens in Hamlet when Polonius, remember, is spying on the conversation with Hamlet and Gertrude. Dead for a ducat, he says, and he stabs through the canvas. That's right. I think that's right after Hamlet gives his soliloquy about ecstasy. My pulse is yours. Doth temperately keep time and makes his healthful music. It is not madness that I have uttered. Bring me to the test, and neither matter will reword which madness would gamble from. And then, mother, for love of grace, lay not that flattering unction to your soul. That's when she says, oh, Hamlet, thou hast cleft my heart in twain. He's got a broken heart, in other words. Fowler is brokenhearted in this, but it seems that he's breaking his own heart. On page 67, 66 and 67, my note says, the French colonel must self-edit all of his comments because of intelligence and propaganda potential mixed with the hard reality of a 24-hour death. Fowler has to self-edit the self-edited comments to avoid expulsion, which is interesting. That sort of shows you the journalistic integrity of the time. So in other words, Fowler is going to interview the French colonel, right? And the French colonel has to be careful about what he says because of the war and because of the propaganda that can come out of it and because of intelligence. So he self-edits his comments. He gives an edited version of the truth to Fowler, and then Fowler himself has to further dilute the comments because he himself can't be expelled. He doesn't want to avoid expulsion from Vietnam. Now, all that is fine. That makes sense, right? Except for the fact that it shows you that he does have interests, right? He does have interests. He's not totally objective. You know, Jay's talked about this. Like, it's so interesting when journalists claim their objectivity when they clearly is it possible to be completely objective in terms of having an opinion, and why? Of course he has an opinion. He represents the foreign government. Pages 66 and 67. The colonel says, okay, so it says, the French correspondents were at a loss. They could speak very little English. The colonel had broken the rules. They muttered angrily together. I'm no judge, the colonel said. Perhaps the American newspapers would say, oh, the French are always complaining, always begging. And in Paris, the communists would accuse the French are spilling their blood for America, and America will not even send a second-hand helicopter. It does no good. At the end of it, we should still have no helicopters, and the enemy would still be there, 50 miles from Hanoi. At least I can print that, can I? That you need helicopters bad? You can say, the French colonel said, that 6 months ago, we had 3 helicopters, and now we have 1. That's terrible. 1, he repeated, with a kind of amazed bitterness. You can say that if a man is wounded in this fighting, not seriously wounded, just wounded, he knows that he is probably a dead man. 12 hours, 24 hours perhaps, on a stretcher to the ambulance. Then bad tracks, a breakdown, perhaps an ambush, gangrene. It's better to be killed outright. The French correspondents leant forward, trying to understand. You can write that, he said, looking all the more venomous for his physical beauty. Interprétez, he ordered, and walked out of the room, leaving the captains the unfamiliar task of translating from English into French. A perfect example of Pyle's American idealism mixed in with his CIA subversion and American exceptionalism versus, this is my note, Fowler's stark fatalistic realism mixed with his blindness. He also sees things for other than what they are, occurs on pages 74 and 75. I was to see many times that look of pain and disappointment touch his eyes and mouth when reality didn't match the romantic ideas he cherished, or when someone he loved or admired dropped below the impossible standard he had set. Once, I remember, I caught York Harding out in a gross error of fact, and I had to comfort him. It's human to make mistakes. He laughed nervously and said, you must think me a fool, but, well, I almost thought him infallible. He added, my father took to him a lot the only time they met, and my father is darn difficult to please. That's his anecdotal evidence for his worldview. The big black dog called Duke, having pen and law. Okay, he's got a dog. And let's see. It was then I heard Fonk's step. I had hoped against hope that he would have gone before she returned. I heard it too and recognized it. So what he does here, what Pyle does, is that he doesn't like how Fowler befouls Fong. He thinks that, you're doing this lady wrong. You're having this relationship with her. You're just stringing her along, and then you're going to leave, which is interesting because Fowler tries to explain, look, man, I'm not here to leave. I'm here to stay. Okay, you're the one that's coming in, and then you're going to dip out and you're going to leave. Just like your whole world, just like the French did. But he never reflects on himself and says, just like we did, just like I'm doing now, and actually I intend to do that. But what he says is he sort of justifies himself by saying, like, look, man, Fong is a hoe. All right? She knows exactly what's going on here. She doesn't want to marry me. In fact, it would be cruel to take her back to London and subject her to society back there where everybody's going to know what she is. And Pyle is like, no, man, I'm going to take her. I'm going to marry her. I'm in love with her. By the way, Pyle like immediately falls in love with her because she's the first girl that he's come up. So Fowler is, he is suspicious that, Pyle has never been with a woman, and Pyle says that he sort of says that at one point. He's like, I've never been with a woman, but it's not that I've never been with a woman. He's just never fallen in love with a woman. But, he's this young idealist, but he's been, doing all of his, do you know what goes on? It's going, all of his stuff back there at Harvard, Yale, right? But Pyle also has probably no actual intention of taking her back to America and, letting her fit in with his Harvard. It was never going to happen, right? He just refuses to come to terms with it. But he thinks that Fowler is befouling this woman when actually he's the one that is leaving the bombs in public places that are killing her family members in her country, right? Page 84, we see the all-seeing eye over the door of the Chaldeus Church. And this is, the Chaldeus Church is sort of a weird, indigenous ethnic version of a combination of Intel Protestantism and, Intel expat Protestantism and Catholicism mixed with a kind of shamanism. And the guy who leads it is clearly supposed to be a kind of a what's the guy's name who led the Moonies? And we did a whole stream on this, on the guy mentioned in the book, in Libra, Don DeLeo. We did a stream on Don DeLeo. And of course, who also is tied in with DM and is being funded by Pyle. But the all-seeing eye is not unusual. It's interesting that it pops up in this book, but it's not unusual in terms of the locus because, like Doug Valentine mentions in the Phoenix program, they saw this symbol Michael Aquino talks about this. They saw this symbol everywhere when they got there, and they decided they didn't decide to use it because they saw it, but Lansdale and the others who began the Phoenix program told the operators to paint this over the door of the places that they infiltrated. And then, they would knock on the door and say, trick or treat, MFer, and then kill everybody inside and leave the all-seeing eye pointed over the door. In other words, like everybody's being watched. I think the VC did this as well. But it certainly lends an occult imagery to the operations. Page 88 is pretty brilliant. It says, I turned my memories over at random like pictures in an album. A fox I'd seen by the light of an enemy flare over Orpington, stealing along beside a fowl run out of his russet place in the marginal country. The body of a bayoneted Malay with a Gurkha patrol had brought at the back of a lorry into a mining camp in Pahang, and the Chinese coolies stood by and giggled with nerves while a brother Malay put a cushion under the dead head, a pigeon on a mantelpiece, poised for flight in a hotel bedroom, my wife's face in a window, and I came home to say goodbye for the last time. My thoughts had begun and ended with her. She must have received my letter more than a week ago, and the cable I did not expect had not come. But they say if a jury remains out for long enough, there's hope for the prisoner. In another week, if no letter arrived, could I begin to hope? All around me, I could hear the cars of the soldiers and the diplomats revving up. The party was over for another year. The stampede back to Saigon was beginning, and curfew called. I went out to look for Pyle. So he thinks of himself as a prisoner, right, in his marriage, but really he's a prisoner in his own thoughts, his own worldview, his own system, his own beliefs. He's made himself a prisoner. Let's see. They argue on pages 96 and 97 about their cringe non-belief and global strategy. On let's see. Oh, they mentioned the creeper Kinsey on pages 102 and 103 because they're talking about sex, and so they mentioned the creeper Kinsey in his reports. Page 112. Okay, let's read this. Page 112. Oh, no, you wouldn't, Thomas, he added with unbearable. If I had been you, I'd have left you, I said. Oh, no, you wouldn't, Thomas. Thomas is Fowler. Moi, O'Kane. He added with unbearable complacency. I know you better than you do yourself. Angrily, I tried to move away from him and take my own weight, but the pain came roaring back like a train in a tunnel, and I leant more heavily against him before I began to sink into the water. This is the point where they have tried to escape from the rice paddies, the fields, and then finally a dark tower, where as soon as they escape from the dark tower, the two natives, the two young guys in there were killed in an attack, and then Fowler gets injured, And then, of course, Pyle saves him. So now they're arguing. He got both arms around me and held me up. When he got me there, he lowered me flat in the shallow mud below the bank of the edge of the field. And when the pain retreated and I opened my eyes and ceased to hold my breath, I could see only the elaborate cipher of the constellations, a foreign cipher which I couldn't read. They were not the stars of home. His face wheeled over me, blotting them out. I'm going down the road, Thomas, to find a patrol. Don't be a fool. They'll shoot you before they know who you are if the Viets don't get you. It's the only chance. You can't lie in the water for 6 hours. You want to wait around here for 6 hours? What's that from? Tell me in the chat. What's that from? You want to wait around here for 6 hours? Then lay me in the road. It's no good leaving you the Sten gun. Of course it's not. If you are determined to be a hero, at least go slowly through the rice. The patrol would pass before I signal it. You don't speak French. I shall call out, Je suis français. Don't worry, Thomas. I'll be very careful. Of course he speaks French, by the way. He probably claims to not speak French, but of course he speaks French. We know that he's a spook. Let's see. With the caution of a hero in a boy's adventure story, proud of his caution like a scout's badge and quite unaware of the absurdity and the improbability of his adventures. I lay and listened for the shots from the Viets or a Legion patrol, but none came. You did not want to run across a Legion patrol, by the way, if you are in Nam. If it doesn't matter who you are, if you're a journalist, if you're an American, if you are a Viet, you don't want to run across a French Foreign Legion patrol in French Indochina. Bad news. I turned my head enough to see what remained of our tower, a heap of mud and bamboo and struts which seemed to sink lower as the flames of the car sank. There was peace when the pain went, a kind of armistice day of the nerves. I wanted to sing. I thought how strange it was that men of my profession would make only 2 news lines out of all this night. It was just a common or garden night, and I was the only strange thing about it. Then I heard a low crying begin again from what was left of the tower. One of the guards must be alive. I thought, poor devil, if we hadn't broken down outside his post, he could have surrendered, as they nearly all surrendered or fled at the first call from the megaphone. But we were there, 2 white men, and we had the Sten, and they didn't dare to move. When we left, it was too late. I was responsible for that voice crying in the dark. I had prided myself on detachment, on not belonging to this war, but those wounds had been inflicted by me just as though I had used the Sten as Pyle had wanted to do. So he realizes that he is responsible for the death of these 2 people. And one of the interesting things that happens here is that we have the symbolism of the newspaper headline, right? And what that really symbolizes is that an entire war is broken down into headlines for the edification of and the consumption of the people, of the folks at home who are reading this over their toast and tea, as T.S. Eliot says. Right? In other words, Fowler becomes part of the story unintentionally. It doesn't matter whether it's unintentional or intentional, right? I mean, it's not gonzo journalism. He's not doing Hunter S. Thompson, but he does become part of the story. And what he wonders is he's amazed at the fact that this whole night where it's like life or death struggle and people died and it was because of him and he's there could be boiled down to 2 simple headlines in some newspaper that will immediately be forgotten, which speaks to his worldview, his sort of fatalistic worldview. But again, he refuses to take the account of the fact that he's part of it. He's the one he literally caused it this time. And that's why he talks about the foreign cipher of the stars. They're not the stars of home. Just like in Wizard of Oz, right? He wants this magical, occult, no place like home. He wants to be able to click his heels and go back home. But the question is, where is his home? He's defied his home. He's defiled his new home. So he has no home. But it's his fault. At least what's in his immediate presence and in his immediate surroundings is his fault. The entire thing is not his fault, but he sort of stands in for whose fault it is, right? Yes, Courtney says Graham Greene featured prominently in Donnie Darko. We mentioned Donnie Darko a couple of nights ago, by the way, on the JD stream. That's how I found That's how I found JD back in 2014. I've seen Donnie Darko. I know this is a digression. For anybody watching this who's like, oh man, it's digressions. Well, whatever. I can do what I want. What I mean by that is, we're discussing the landscape of literature. Okay. So obviously all of the allusions, and all of the various metaphors are going to occur. They purposefully tie in to works of literature. That's what we do here, right? So we can discuss this. If we want to discuss this, we can. I also don't make videos. I make live streams. I've always been live. I'm never gonna do videos. It's always gonna be live, because it's just real time. We're just discussing literature. We're deep diving, so that's fine. Anyway, So I've seen Donnie Darko probably 322 times. Eliminate, confirm. And it's funny how that is another work that has so many multiple levels and layers of meaning, each of which are valid depending on your interpretation. And I think that the time travel is just kind of it's not a MacGuffin, but it's supposed to be for one, it's a metaphor for Donnie Darko's his disassociation, right? His loss of time. He clearly has DID. I mean, that's his whole problem in the book. I mean, in the movie. Also, Donnie Darko, done by what's his face from Midlothian, Virginia, from my neck of the woods. So anyway, let's see. On page 115, he takes morphia. Page 121, he goes back to his opium den. Page 125, we find out Pyle is CIA. They keep the French fighting, but cut out their business at the same time. And cut out, I wrote, is a pun. It means both remove and front. Yeah, so when he says, on page 124A, he says economic mission, but that covers a multitude of sins. Interesting, again, his metaphysical and religious language here, despite the fact that he refuses to believe, right? He says, I think he's interested in home industries. I suppose as American businessmen tie up with an American business tie-up. I don't like the way they keep the French fighting and cut out their business at the same time. I heard him talking the other day at a party the legation was giving to visiting congressmen. They had to put him on to brief them. God help Congress, I said. He hasn't been in the country 6 months. But that doesn't matter. Do you get it? It doesn't matter. He went to Midlothian High School. God help, he was talking about the old colonial powers, England and France, and how you two couldn't expect us to win the confidence of the Asiatics. That was where America came in now with clean hands. Hawaii, Puerto Rico, I said, New Mexico. Then someone asked him some stock questions about the chances of the government here ever beating the Viet Minh, and he said a third force could do it. So again, he takes this. We're supposed to think that he takes all of his political ideology from this book by York Harding. But in fact, we know that in a way that itself is kind of a cipher, right? That the book is sort of a cipher text for the fact that he's actually pushing a line that he is supposed to push, which has probably been presented to him by, Rand and various interests within the pyramidal organization, and that he's going to try and spread this, and that will be their modus operandi, right? He says, there was always a third force to be found free from communism and the taint of colonialism. National democracy, he called it. You only had to find a leader and keep him safe from the old colonial powers. It's all in York Harding, I said. He'd read it before he came out here. He talked about it the first week, and he's learned nothing. But again, it doesn't matter if he's learned nothing. It's not that he's learned nothing. He doesn't need to learn anything, so to speak. Like, he doesn't need to, hang out in the village and, meet the locals in terms of what he's doing, right? He has no interest in that. His interest is going there, doing the thing that he's been sent to do, and then making sure that it's secure, and then leaving, That's it. That's what he's supposed to do. He doesn't have to go and meet the locals unless it's for his, to use them or for his benefit. Let's see. So that's the third force. Page 152, there's an awesome quote, which is, "You are a journalist. You know better than I do that we can't win. You know the road to Hanoi is cut and mined every night. You know we lose one class of St. Cyr every year." St. Cyr is I know y'all know this, but St. Cyr is the French military academy. It's it's the West Point of France. It's also where officers go before the officers will. Sometimes they have French officers in charge of Legion units, and they're trained at St. Cyr. We were nearly beaten in 50. The latter has given us 2 years of grace. That's all. We are professionals. We have to go on fighting till the politicians tell us to stop. Probably they will get together and agree to the same peace that we could have had at the beginning, making nonsense of all these years. His ugly face, which had winked at me before the dive, wore a kind of professional brutality, like a Christmas mask from which a child's eyes peer through the holes in the paper. You would not understand the nonsense, Fowler. You are not one of us. There are other things in one's life, which make nonsense of the years. And then we get on pages 174 and 175, we get references to Tacitus and Suetonius and Nero, which we've covered. Fowler, and we find out Fowler helps set up Pyle after CIA detonates another public bomb. So again, Fowler is responsible for another death. He is the one who sets up Pyle with Dominguez, who is an opium warlord. And they find his body in the mud. He's been assassinated. And then on pages 182 and 183, we get the charmed life of Macbeth, Scaramouche, and Oedipus. It says, let's see. He says, "No life is charmed. Luck had been with Pyle at Fat DM and on the road from Ten Yin, but luck doesn't last. And they had 2 hours to see that no charm worked. As a French soldier sat beside me with his hand in a girl's lap, and I envy the simplicity of his happiness or his misery, whichever it might be. I left before the film was over and took a trishaw to the Vieux Moulin." And then the book ends with him saying, he says, "There was so much you could have done together. He was young. You are not old," she says to him. "The skyscrapers, the Empire State Building, right? The promise of America." She said with a small hesitation, "I want to see the Cheddar Gorge," which is a shit place in England. "It isn't the Grand Canyon." I pulled her down to the bed. "I'm sorry, Fong." "What are you sorry for?" "It's a wonderful telegram. My sister." "Yes, go and tell your sister. Kiss me first." Her excited mouth skated over my face, and she was gone. I thought of the first day and Pyle sitting beside me at the Continental with his eye on the soda fountain across the way. Everything had gone right with me since he had died. But how I wished there existed someone to whom I could say that I was sorry. And it says March 1952 to June 1955. So that's the book. And the book, of course, again, is so revelatory in terms of, think of the time. Think of reading this at the time, right? Or think of reading this as a person who had some sort of influence back in the late 50s and early 60s. And then we get fully into Vietnam, and they're like, this is exactly what's happening in the book. Just read the book. None of this has to happen if you just read the book. Of course, the people who have the influence have probably read the book or are aware of the book, because the people who have influence wrote the book. Graham Greene was MI6. Did you know that? Graham Greene was, in fact, his book, Our Man in Havana, is kind of a satirical take on geopolitical situations. And, you might think like, oh, it's amazing that he wrote this book and he was MI6. But again, that's part of the programming and the propaganda and the culture war and the cutouts right? Um, the strategy of tension, all this stuff, and it's like, no, the people know this, they know this, but it doesn't matter. Do you get it? It doesn't matter to them that it's going to fail. In fact, you know, Valentine and Michael Aquino pointed out that, you know, Vietnam, in a way, I'm not sure again how accurate this is, right? But in terms of telling the whole story, but one aspect of it is certainly that Vietnam existed as a practice, as a war game, as a live war game, right? And this is just like what's in Henry IV. It's like, in fact, it's kind of an inversion of that, because in Henry IV, they say, you know, Henry tells Hal, go on the Crusades, go and do your military operations abroad, go to France, because it will divert the nobles from having a civil war, right, from destroying your own country, so you can secure power, right? You'll have a common enemy. But this is kind of a war game practice for bringing the war home. And we can say that that is a vindicated thought because of now, because of look at things now. Look at what's happened over the past few years. Look at the Great Reset. And that seems to have occurred and is still occurring. So anyway, that is The Quiet American by Greene. I know that was kind of a brief analysis into the book, but it's a short book. You know, you can read this book in a couple hours. It's a great book. And again, just to return, I would go back to Alfred W. McCoy's Politics of Heroin. Great book. You should definitely get this if you're interested in this stuff at all. I've got a whole shelf up there of French Foreign Legion books, which are, you know, especially if you're a dude, are really great. They're so awesome. I love reading about the French Foreign Legion. I always have, because like a lot of people who join the Legion, I'm not saying I'm like that, but I'm saying people who join the Legion, Legio Patria Nostra, right, are interested in this idea of escape and adventurism, right? And it always turns out in the books that it's not that. It is that, but it's a lot harsher than that. But I think I have every book in English written about the French Foreign Legion. Also, I would recommend, just in terms of verse, and we've covered this before. This was one of my. This stream is kind of buried back there in the archives, even though we've been going less than a year. We can't really call them archives, but and this is the poem by Yusef Kumanyaku, the greatest living poet in my opinion, who signed my book in 2000, and it's called Starlight Scope Myopia. Now, this is pretty. I think this is relevant to the stream. That's why I called it this, because Pyle is myopic, right? He has a short-sighted view of, at least Fowler thinks that he does, that he has a short-sighted view of the situation, but in fact he has a kind of hyperopia. He has a long view of because of whom he represents. It's actually Fowler who has the short-sighted view, because he refuses to see. I mean, he looks up at the stars in the one point, and he notices what other people think and what he should think, but he purposefully refuses to go along with it. But Starlight Scope Myopia says, gray-blue shadows lift shadows onto an ox cart, making night work for us. The Starlight Scope brings men into killing range. The river under V Bridge takes the heart away, like the water god riding his dragon. Smoke-colored Viet Cong move under our eyelids. Lords over loneliness winding like coral vine through sandalwood and lotus inside our lowered heads years after this scene ends. The brain closes down. What looks like one step into the trees, they're lifting crates of ammo and sacks of rice, swaying under their shared weight, caught in the infrared. What are they saying? Are they talking about women, or calling the Americans Buku Dien Kai Dao? One of them is laughing. You want to place a finger to his lips and say, shh. You try reading ghost talk on their lips. They say, up, up we go, lifting is one. This one, old, bow-legged, you feel you could reach out and take him into your arms. You Peer down the sights of your M16, seeing the full moon loaded on an ox cart. And I read that because that is a perfect statement about what happens in the book, especially in terms of the one situation where they go out into the field and they are listening to the call of the soldiers, and they can't tell, they can't tell what they're saying because it's lost in the sort of auditory fog of distance and the war and munitions and mortars and French and Viet, right? The one last quote I'll read from the book ties in with that, and that's on page 98. And it says, let's see, it says, I stood below the tower for a minute to get my vision back. There was starlight, but no moonlight. Moonlight reminds me of a mortuary and the cold wash of an unshaded globe over a marble slab. But starlight is alive and never still. It is almost as though someone in those vast spaces is trying to communicate a message of goodwill, for even the names of the stars are friendly. Venus is any woman we love. The bears are the bears of childhood, and I suppose the Southern Cross, to those like my wife who believe, may be a favorite hymn or a prayer beside the bed. Once I shivered as Pyle had done, but the night was hot enough. Only the shallow stretch of water on either side gave a kind of icing to the warmth. I started out towards the car, and for a moment when I stood on the road, I thought it was no longer there. That shook my confidence, even after I remembered that it had petered out 30 yards away. I couldn't help walking with my shoulders bent. I felt more unobtrusive that way. Again, he's just lost, right? He's lost. He understands that there is meaning and other people have meaning, but he is lost. So, that is The Quiet American, again, by Graham Greene, 1955. I'll probably read Our Man in Havana. I don't know if I'll do an analysis on it. Right now I'm reading Hermann Hesse's Beneath the Wheel, which I probably won't do an analysis on that, but I'll probably do one on Steppenwolf in the future. If you're interested in me doing an analysis, you can always contact me at madmaximalism with 2 X's at gmail.com, M-A-X-X, Mad Maximalism. And, drop me some suggestions. You can leave a comment after the stream. Leave a comment below, as they say, and give me more suggestions. I've used a bunch of you guys' suggestions, and so I read those. So please keep doing those. In fact, this week was weird because I had 3 different conversations with 3 different people, 3 different unrelated people, where from their side, the book Wrinkle in Time popped up. So I don't know why that's occurring so much, but shouts out to Kim. Shouts out to Countess, our homegirl Countess, who both did that. And there was another conversation, but all 3, I forget where the other occurred. Was somebody, but I don't know why. But it occurred 3 different ones. I think I don't know Wrinkle in Time, so I'll have to look into it. But I think that A Wrinkle in Time involves 3 women, doesn't it? Doesn't it involve like 3 witches? Of course, the weird sisters, Macbeth. So correct me if I'm wrong on that. But maybe I need to look into that book. I don't know. Somebody dropped me a great suggestion this week about covering Johnny Tremain. You remember that Family Guy episode with Peter? The life of a silversmith's apprentice was very hard, remember? I mean, I read Johnny Tremain in 3rd grade, and I loved it. And I remember the book well. I remember reading it in Miss Greene Mean the Homework Machines class. So maybe I need to go back and reread Johnny Tremain, because this person said that there was some relevance to now in it. So I'll go back and read that. That's great. It's a great suggestion. And again, I'll be going back and doing Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I'll be tying in Helter Skelter into that, and this book by Jeff Gunn about Manson right there. And Jeff, what's the name of the other book? Shouts out to Jethro, our homeboy. What's the name of the other Manson book? The one that came out just a couple years ago. The one that Rogan talked with the author about. I think I probably need to read that one. Charlie. Well, I don't know if he was smart. He also said My mother's Eisenhower and my father's an icebox. So, but anyway, we'll be tying those into we'll be tying those into the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood stream, and I'll be reading the novel. I'll probably be doing that from down south in the next couple weeks. Chaos by Tom O'Neill. Thanks. Thank you, Jethro. Shouts out to you. So that's about all I got, y'all. Again, if you want to support me, please, drop a super chat anytime with PayPal, Venmo, Cash App. You can hit the super chat link down there. You can do a super thanks. You could drop me a big fat one with super thanks, and I would appreciate that. You can also support me in a big way by just sharing the stream, telling your family and friends about it, IRL. Help me get up to 1,500 subs. Let's see where I am now. We're at 1451, so we're getting there. And then again, shouts out to our homeboy Church of the Eternal Logos, who is 10 times bigger and has been such a good friend and puts out such amazing content continuously. He is consistent and constant, high IQ, and really a good fella, a good friend. So shouts out to David Patrick Harry at Church of the Eternal Logos, and of course to our homeboy Jay Dyer at Jay's Analysis, who just hit 100,000 subs. So thank you so much to Jay again for having me on there. Go back and if you happen to have not seen that, go back and watch his stream the other night that we did on his channel about Wizard of Oz and Return to Oz. It's doing pretty well. So we had a great conversation. Kristen at Slowboy Whiteboard says, I got a good Dave McGowan interview on my channel, RIP. Yes, I watched that. Shouts out to Kristen at Slowboy Whiteboard, who always has the most awesome videos. And I've got McGowan's book up here, Program to Kill. Everybody should have that. So we'll probably be tying that in as well. Shouts out to Rachel, our homegirl, Rachel Wilson, and Andrew Wilson at The Crucible. Rachel Wilson, based homeschool mom, who are such good friends, always support us so much. I thank you so much for your generosity and friendship. I love y'all so much. Thank you guys. Thank you all for being here. Really appreciate you. And I hope to see y'all soon. And let me check one more time. And I hope everybody is getting some presents and some family time, and reaching out to their friends and all that stuff. I cannot wait to get down south to be with my family. Can't wait to get out of here. Yes, yes, and Hensley, let's go. So thank y'all so much. I really appreciate y'all. I love you, and I will see you next time. All right, y'all. Peace.